Okay, everybody. So, continuing our journey through the 10 planetary archetypes, the 10 primary bands on your consciousness tuning device. And I'm going to move on to the Jupiter archetype now. It happens that in the sky this summer, and actually into next year as well, the summer of 2013, there's a really lovely alignment in the sky right now. It's a Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune grand trine. It's called something that doesn't happen every day, and when you put these three planets together, it's really excellent for. On the one hand, Jupiter with Neptune is kind of appropriate for rich, expansive spiritual visions, which hopefully we're exploring together here. But then Saturn is in the grand trine, and Saturn grounds things. It brings maturity and wisdom and a kind of a level of seriousness that brings weight to things. And so Jupiter, Neptune, the big vision, but with Saturn, a kind of maturity. And I feel like in my own astrological journey that I'm in a moment that feels like this grand trine a bit, where I definitely have this very big, expansive archetypal vision of the cosmos. And I've been on this astrological path for about 20 years now, and so there's a gift of that many years of effort, and that's the Saturn, the hard work, the level of maturity that I hope I'm conveying, and so I think it's appropriate to start with these three planets. Started with Saturn, now we'll do Jupiter, and then we'll do Neptune, and so Jupiter, the god Jupiter, is the god of expansion, the impulse to expand our horizons, the impulse towards the mountaintop peaks, the impulse to get up high and see the big expansive overviews. Jupiter has something to do with good fortune, with success, abundance, joy, hope, positivity. It's the impulse towards travel, the impulse towards broad cultural experience, the impulse towards high culture, the impulse towards higher education. Jupiter has something to do with that impulse to get up high and get the big philosophical overviews. And so Jupiter is associated with philosophy and religion, and also it has something to do with just the big picture. Jupiter is all these things. It has a lot to do with our capacity to smile, our capacity to have a sense of humor. And so one of the key questions to be asking yourself if you're trying to live a multidimensional life in each moment is, am I remembering to have a sense of humor? Am I remembering to look at this from a humorous perspective? Now, if you're only doing that, if you're only looking at things in a humorous way, then you're in what we might call a kind of archetypal possession state, a Jupiterian possession state, where you're always making light of things, or always coming from that kind of jovial, laughing perspective, perhaps without enough seriousness, which is what Saturn brings. But as long as you're remembering to remember Saturn, then remembering to smile, and remembering to have a more positive, even humorous way of looking at things is a really important dimension of the spiritual path, I think. This also is where we learn to celebrate. Jupiter has to do with celebration, and it also has something to do with the expansive qualities of ritual. When we take the sense of spirituality and ritualize it in a sense, in a kind of pageantry sense, the way the Catholic Church uses lots of theater in a sense, and the theater itself is a Jupiterian set and setting. And so continuing now to think about Jupiter, Jupiter has something to do with pride. When we're able to be proud of ourselves, that's a well-integrated Jupiter. When we're able to look at our lives through the lens and the perspective of kind of positive celebration, when we can look at a moment in our life perhaps where we've been critical and then look at it from a different perspective. Jupiter elevates things. It can bring a kind of positive lens. And so when we're able to look at a moment in our life and realize, wow, you know, even though that was a really challenging moment and maybe I didn't do as well as I could have, I actually did a lot better than I might have done. And actually, there's ways in which that moment that I previously was self-critical towards myself about, when I look at it from Jupiter's perspective, I can actually see that, you know, it was a success in many ways, that I succeeded in ways that I hadn't previously noticed. And so Jupiter helps us along these lines. Um, I know for myself, I'm a really strong Jupiter person. I have Jupiter rising in my own natal chart, Jupiter conjunct the sun. And from very early in my life, especially as I got into adolescence, I had like a really big impulse to travel, to move beyond the limited circle of where I came from, the town and the state that I grew up in here in the United States. Jupiter was that impulse to go abroad. When I was in high school, one of my first travel experiences was to Mexico, and I remember that sense of moving to another culture and seeing a whole nother world and how it expanded my life. And then later, many other travels, and also the impulse towards higher education and philosophical studies and so forth. Now, the Jupiter shadow side is significant, and it has something to do with overexpansion. When we expand too much in our lives, when we try to explore too broadly, sometimes we overdo it. And that's when you have to bring in Saturn. And Saturn is like the rubber band that snaps you back to center. When you've pulled far away from your center with Jupiter, Saturn pulls you back with a force of gravity to what you need to do in the moment to be responsible. Jupiter can sometimes be overexpansion in an irresponsible way. It can also be a kind of arrogance and superiority. The sense of superiority is one of the most significant shadow forms of Jupiter, and in some ways it's Jupiter that is responsible for some of the greatest suffering on the planet. Whenever any people feel superior to another people and feels as though they have the right to control them, dominate them, or kill them, that's the Jupiter archetype in part at work. And whole nations have been swept up in the sense of superiority. Certainly the United States is guilty of this, feeling like a superior nation and a superior culture to other parts of the world, and the way in which we've exerted force from that sense of superiority. This is the kind of trouble that Jupiter can get us into. You know, the way in which sometimes men feel superior to women, and sometimes women feel superior to men. How older people feel superior to younger people. How younger people feel superior to older people, and so forth. The Jupiter lens can dominate in this shadow sense, and so Saturn is the corrective medicine for shadow Jupiter. Saturn helps us stay humble, helps us remember that we're flawed like everybody. Saturn helps us keep it real and remember that we're limited human beings like every other human being. And yet, you can go too far in that direction, feeling just like an ordinary every man or every woman, and not have enough positive Jupiter, which is when you're able to feel proud of yourself in a way that's not arrogant or superior. It is actually possible to feel simultaneously proud and humble at the same time. And I think that's one of the major tasks of the spiritual journey is, how can I be proud of myself and also stay humble and remember that I'm just like every other human being. So anything else that I want to say about Jupiter at this point? Jupiter is like Santa Claus, or Jupiter is that feeling of joy and abundance. When you're in that place of abundance and you feel your life is filled with abundance, then you are generous. And generosity is a key indicator of a well-integrated Jupiter channel. of the psyche. When you're able to live from abundance and generosity, then you know you've got that Jupiter channel tuned in pretty well. So that's just a little bit on the Jupiter archetype, and so now I'm going to stop and we'll move on to the next archetype, which is Neptune.